Welcome back, listeners. Let's dive into a truly disturbing case today. This one's out of Winter Park, Florida, and involves the death of Jorge Torres Jr. back in 2020.
Yeah, a really tragic story. And the case against his girlfriend, Sarah Boone, is complex, to say the least. It took 4 years to navigate the legal system.
4 years. Well, we've got a lot to unpack here. We've pulled information from a bunch of different news sources, including Daily Mail Online and FOX X35 Orlando, for all the details of the events, the trial, and all the twists and turns.
Right, we're also going to be drawing on some analysis from Bailey Sarian on YouTube, which offers another perspective on this very strange story.
So what we're going to do today is, we're going to break down the key parts of this case for you. We want to examine the events, the evidence, and the really unusual aspects of Boone's legal journey, all without getting lost in legal complexities.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's start at the beginning with what Sarah Boone initially told the police about the death of Jorge Torres Jr.
So her initial story, the one she gave to the police, is pretty hard to believe. She claimed that his death happened during a game of hide and seek.
Hide and seek.
Yeah, hide and seek. And to make it even stranger, she said they'd been drinking wine beforehand.
Wine-fueled hide and seek, huh?
Apparently. And she went on to tell police that she went upstairs to sleep, leaving him wherever he was hiding. And then she said she woke up the next morning and found him, unresponsive, inside a suitcase.
Inside a suitcase?
Yeah, a suitcase.
That's quite a story.
It is. And what's even more unsettling is that police body cam footage shows her recounting all of this very calmly.
Wait, calm?
Calmly, which, as we'll see, contrasts sharply with the evidence that was later uncovered.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I mean, finding your boyfriend dead in a suitcase after a night of hide and seek, that's not something you'd usually describe calmly.
Exactly. And that brings us to the turning point in this case, when the investigation uncovered two videos on Boone's cell phone, recorded that very night. These videos painted a completely different and far more disturbing picture of what happened.
Okay, so we've got these videos. What's on them?
These videos are really the heart of this case. They actually show Jorge Torres trapped inside the zipped-up suitcase.
Trapped inside.
Yes, trapped inside. And in the first video, you can hear him clearly saying, "I can't breathe." He's pleading for help. And meanwhile, Boone is laughing in the background and taunting him.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's chilling.
What does she say to him?
She says some truly awful things. Things like, "For everything you've done to me, F you stupid."
Oh no.
And then, unbelievably, she says, "Yeah, that's what you do when you choke me."
Is she trying to justify what she's doing?
It certainly sounds that way. And then she goes on to say, "That's what I feel like when you cheat on me."
So she's basically saying that she's doing to him what she believes he's done to her.
Yeah, it's like a twisted form of revenge. And the second video, which was recorded about 11 minutes after the first one, shows that Torres is still trapped in the suitcase.
He's still in there.
Still in there and still pleading for help. He's calling out to Boone, saying he can't breathe. And her response is just as horrifying.
What does she say?
She just repeats that same phrase. "That's what it's like when you cheat on me."
Hmm.
And then before ending the recording, she says, "Then you should probably shut the fuck up."
Wow. It's just dot cold.
It is. And there's something else about these videos that's significant. They show the suitcase in different positions.
What do you mean by different positions?
Well, in one video, it's upright, and in another, it's on its side. That suggests that something happened during that time gap, those 11 minutes between recordings.
So we don't know exactly what happened during those missing 11 minutes.
Right, it's unclear. But the different positions of the suitcase suggest that she was moving it around, or maybe even interacting with it in some way, while Torres was still trapped inside.
Okay, so we have these videos showing Boone's actions and words, which are pretty damning. What was her explanation for all of this?
So when confronted with the videos, she admitted to recording them. However, she claimed she didn't remember doing so, blaming it on the alcohol.
You blamed it on the alcohol.
Yeah. And she even called the videos a bad look.
A bad look.
Yeah, which, given their content, is a wild understatement. It's really hard to reconcile her casual dismissal of the videos with the severity of the situation they depict.
Absolutely. And that's where the legal battle really begins, right?
Right. The case was incredibly complex and dragged on for 4 years. During that time, Boone cycled through a shocking number of attorneys.
No, many.
9.
9 attorneys.
9, including a period where she actually represented herself in court.
Wow. That's highly unusual for a serious case like this.
It is. It suggests that there were challenges in her defense strategy and maybe some difficulty accepting legal advice.
So she switched lawyers a lot, but what were the reasons? Why did she keep firing them?
She cited various reasons, from irreconcilable differences to conflicts of interest. She even wrote a 58-page handwritten letter to the judge detailing all her complaints about her lawyers and the legal system in general.
A 58-page letter. Handwritten.
Handwritten. It seems like she felt deeply mistreated by the system and was struggling to navigate it effectively.
It definitely points to someone who's feeling incredibly frustrated and maybe even defiant. And didn't she even take an unconventional approach to finding a new lawyer?
She did. It's almost unbelievable, but she actually advertised for a new attorney using a hand-drawn flyer.
A hand-drawn flyer, like something you'd see on a community bulletin board.
Exactly. And the wording on the flyer was pretty interesting. She was looking for someone zealous with a side of keen for an epic opportunity. It sounds more like she was looking for a partner in crime than a lawyer.
Zealous with the side of keen, that's definitely not your typical legal jargon.
It's not. And her defense strategy also seemed to evolve over time. At one point, she was leaning towards using battered spouse syndrome as a defense.
Battered spouse syndrome.
Yeah, it's a legal term used to describe someone who has experienced prolonged domestic abuse. It can sometimes be used to argue self-defense or diminished capacity.
So she was suggesting that she was a victim of abuse.
Right. And a former neighbor even testified to seeing marks on Boone, which could have supported that claim. But then, during the trial, she shifted her strategy.
What do you mean, shifted her strategy?
Well, she seemed to move away from the battered spouse syndrome defense and instead focused on portraying their relationship as loving but complicated. She started emphasizing Torres's issues with alcohol and unemployment.
It sounds like she was trying to paint a picture of a troubled relationship, but one where she wasn't the primary aggressor.
Exactly. And she continued to insist that putting him in the suitcase was just a joke gone wrong.
A joke. With those videos as evidence, that seems like a very hard sell.
It does. And her explanations for Torres's injuries were also inconsistent. He had scratches, bruises, and head trauma, and she initially claimed they were from rough sex.
Rough sex.
Yeah, but when pressed for details, she became very vague and evasive. It just didn't add up.
Okay, so we have Boone's shifting explanations, which seem pretty weak given the evidence. What was the prosecution's case?
The prosecution built a very strong case, and those videos were central to their argument. They argued that the videos clearly showed cruelty and malicious intent, which contradicted Boone's claims of self-defense or an accident.
I can see why those videos would be so powerful. You can hear and see what happened.
Exactly. And they also presented a theory about what happened during that 11-minute gap between the videos.
The 11 minutes where we don't know what happened.
Right. The prosecution theorized that during that time, Boone assaulted Torres with a baseball bat while he was still trapped in the suitcase.
They thought she hit him with a baseball bat.
That was their theory, based on sounds heard in the videos and the nature of his injuries. And the medical examiner's report supported this theory.
What did the medical examiner find?
The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was positional asphyxia, meaning he suffocated because of the position he was in. But they also found those scratches, bruises, a cut lip, and the head trauma, which are all consistent with blunt force trauma.
So the injuries suggest a struggle and a possible assault.
Exactly. And to further complicate things, the prosecution also brought up the history of domestic violence between Boone and Torres.
So it wasn't just Boone claiming abuse, there was a history of violence on both sides.
Right. Remember, both Boone and Torres had previous arrests for domestic violence. Boone was arrested in 2018 for attempting to strangle Torres, and he had been arrested for battery.
Wow. So it was a very volatile and abusive relationship, regardless of who was ultimately responsible for Torres's death.
Exactly. And the jury had to weigh all of this evidence, the videos, the injuries, and the history of violence.
What was the verdict?
Well, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours.
Less than 2 hours.
Less than 2 hours. And they found Sarah Boone guilty of second-degree murder.
Wow. That's a pretty quick deliberation. It seems like the evidence against her was overwhelming.
It was. And it's worth noting that she had been offered a plea deal before the trial.
A plea deal? What were the terms?
The prosecution offered her 15 years for manslaughter if she pleaded guilty.
15 years.
Yes, but she rejected it.
That's a huge gamble. It seems like she was convinced of her innocence, or at least that she could convince the jury.
It does. And ultimately, that gamble didn't pay off. She was sentenced to life in prison.
Life in prison.
Yes. And even at her sentencing, she continued to maintain a strange detachment from the situation.
What do you mean?
Well, she said she forgave Torres's family for turning a blind eye to her abuse, which is a pretty unusual thing to say in that context.
And she also asked for forgiveness from the entire planet, didn't she?
She did. It's a bizarre statement, considering the gravity of the situation.
Absolutely. And I understand that even after she was sentenced, she continued to communicate with the judge.
That's right. She sent him a 28-page letter, also handwritten. In this letter, she criticized the judge's handling of the case, but then also said she forgave him and was excited about her appeal.
It's almost like she's living in a different reality.
It is. It's very hard to understand.
So this case is a really disturbing look at a relationship filled with violence. It's a story of a toxic relationship ending in a horrific act. And those cell phone videos, which were probably meant for something else entirely, ended up being the key evidence that sealed Boone's fate.
What stands out to you most about this whole case?
For me, it's the role of technology. Those videos, intended for who knows what, became the undeniable truth of what happened that night. It makes you think about how we document our lives and the unintended consequences of those records.
That's a great point. And this case also raises a lot of questions about abusive relationships, about the nature of intent, and about accountability. How do we hold people responsible for their actions, especially when factors like alcohol or self-defense are involved?
It's definitely a lot to consider. For our listeners out there, I think this case really highlights the complexities that can exist within relationships and how quickly those complexities can turn deadly. It's a reminder that even in the digital age, actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are irreversible. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening, everyone.